Famous around the world, please welcome the Fantastic Four.
Welcome to the Baxter Building.
We make a point to do family dinner every week.
The inflection point was the birth of this person, Reed Richards.
Okay. Okay, is this guy good or what?
West Coast, mid-century modern home within a New York penthouse.
Welcome to the Film and Furniture podcast, where we delve into the creative minds behind the worlds we see on screen, the sets, the rooms, the furniture, and the stories they tell. I'm Paula Benson, founder and editor of Film and Furniture, and today on the podcast we journey into the bold, retro-futuristic world of Fantastic Four First Steps with the film's production designer, Kasra Farahani. With a design portfolio that spans Loki to Black Panther, Kasra brings to Fantastic Four First Steps a 1960s vision where mid-century modernism collides with colourful space-age visions of the future. We talk in depth about the design of the Baxter apartment, where Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic, Sue Storm, Invisible Woman, Johnny Storm, Human Torch, and Ben the Thing live in harmony in a stunning sci-fi home wrapped in curved wood and tulip chairs, through to Reed Richards' lab, a cathedral of science inspired by 2001: A Space Odyssey and Eames palettes. From flying cars to furniture that feels both mid-century and otherworldly, this is design storytelling on a grand scale. This podcast works just as well without visuals, but just so you know, it's a video podcast, so you can watch along for the full experience. So welcome to the Film and Furniture podcast, Kasra. You have been a production designer on so many amazing films. What a portfolio. And now Fantastic Four First Steps, where, well, the production designer is the superhero in my mind.
Oh, that's kind of you to say. We had a fantastic team, no pun intended, an amazing group of people, starting with Julie Aziz, our set decorator, who was brilliant, who I had the good fortune of working with on the second season of Loki as well. Her and her amazing team breathed so much life and personality into the sets that we make. My art directors, Nick Gottschalk, all the way down to the other art directors and the assistant art directors, concept people, model making team, of course, construction. It's a countless list of supremely talented people at the top of their game that have all sort of come together to make this happen.
I love that you've started this chat by recognising your team, and that's something that I find with production designers, quite humble people that have oodles of creativity, but are always very keen to make sure that everybody who's part of the team is acknowledged. And I think that's really beautiful and very bold.
Oh, no, it's my pleasure. And I wish I remembered to do it more often. Team sport, and it takes a lot of ideas from a lot of different people to make something great.
Absolutely. And especially a big world like this, Fantastic Four First Steps. I mean, it works as a film on its own. You don't necessarily need to know all the backstory of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is me. But for those who don't know much about the Marvel Universe, and for those who do, can you give us a backstory on Fantastic Four First Steps? What's it about?
More than anything, it's about family. You know, it's a extraordinary family in that circumstances have conspired to alter the shape of their lives beyond recognition from your average person, and yet the challenges of being a family and the circumstances of living in a home together and the domestic responsibilities that go along with that are Matt and the writers have done a great job of rendering that facet of life, I think, with a great deal of care. That's what I think is the secret sauce of the film, is that it is a film about superheroes, but it's first and foremost about the family that they form and the family that is growing.
So how did you first get involved?
This project had been percolating and they were kind enough to ask me to do it. Initially, I didn't think I could because we were expecting our second child. Our child was due about a month after they wanted me to start. In the end, they were really gracious about accommodating some of the kind of hard points in my schedule, and we found a way to do it. But I must admit, um, it was an insane pre-production period because of the personal factors going on. But I think there was some of that insight of that I was able to maybe bring into some of the design of just going through that process as the characters were going through that process. We started there the late summer in LA, and we were developing it with a team of artists that I often work with, Joe Studzinski, Josh Beers, Patrick Dunbaker, Jason Swears. These four are kind of like my brain trusts that I've worked with on both seasons of Loki, and lucky enough to have them on this. And then several other brilliant artists, Till Nowak and Tex Katanaga and Joe Kira, who Joe went on to be super critical in the creation of the Fantastic Car. So we kind of hit the ground running to try to really flesh out the broad strokes of the conceptual design, trying to figure out what the language was, because
Mm-hmm.
so much of this world is defined by a single author, that being Reed Richards. The fundamental difference between this 1960s and the 1960s that of our world, of the audience's world, is the inflection point was the birth of this person, Reed Richards. If you imagine he's in his mid 30s or something in the mid 60s, and then from that you infer he was born around 1930, and you start to think that, okay, maybe around 1950 when he's 20, he starts to really impact the world. So, like when you're coming up with New York, anything before 1950 might look the same as our New York, but anything after 1950 might stand a chance of starting to have some of his influence. And so, because he was this, a major determinative figure in the way, Oppenheimer was, or Einstein was, or something like that, that the authorship of the designs that he impacted, specifically those very personally having to do with, the Excelsior spacecraft, the Fantastic Car, the Baxter Building, the Baxter apartment, that there needed to be a through line, an aesthetic through line for those things. I thought that those things should be really nested in the kind of body of work of Eros Sarin and Oscar Niemeyer, specifically those two architects, because I think that their work represents, for me, a sort of refinement of futurism. Like you can see futurism starts to present itself in the early 20th century in so much of pulp novels and advertisement and comics and whatever. Um, Metal Men and the trips to the moon, and the jet age kind of aesthetic starts to take hold of popular culture much earlier than the 60s. But I think it's sort of a little bit, it's naive and sweet and innocent, but a little cheesy as well. And I think when you get to the 60s, the late 60s, mid to late 60s, you start to have some really beautiful, refined versions of that. And I think the work of these two architects really embodies that, where it's like you have the parabolic, or super accelerating splines. The curves are all there. There's so much movement in the silhouettes and energy, and yet there's an austerity in terms of palette and material selection. um, so it's just elegant. It's very elegant. You've lost that sort of stilliness. um, so that became the kind of lighthouse for what the hand of Reed Richard sort of looked like in my mind. And then I think what was important, though, is to accent that with some of that more archetypical retrofuturism, some of those very familiar details. So for instance, if you're looking at the Fantastic Car, it's got these beautiful flowing forms. Then we were looking at concept cars from the mid 60s, American concept cars from the mid 60s. And I don't know this for a fact, but in some ways they looked almost to me like they were inspired by Italian cars of the era or something. There's like a beautiful flowing curved surfaces. So we drew on that inspiration, and yet we felt it was critical to add turbines and chrome bullet tips and radiating chrome fins, these things that are very archetypical of retrofuturism. And it's that kind of balance of having those details and yet not letting them take over, keeping the elegance and the austerity of the forms intact and using those things as accents and also clear indications of era.
Yeah, and a very optimistic era, right? So
Hmm.
post-war, design is really developing. You mentioned Saarinen. So you can see this in the Baxter Building when you first see it, when the lift doors open and they walk in, and you see this fabulous curved window there, and I'm thinking, oh, TWA, Saarinen kind of flight center. And I mean, that in itself at the time, right, was such a mark of, space age, flight, optimism of the future. So I think the aesthetics, this retro futuristic setting is more than aesthetics, right? It's about the optimism of the era, of looking forward about what's possible.
Absolutely. I think that's exactly what it is. The goal was basically for the world of Fantastic Four First Steps to be the manifestation of all the things that we were promised by pop culture and advertisement and media of various sorts. Except in this timeline, because of this critical inflection point, which was the birth of Reed Richards, those ideas are able to be built in real time. They're not just pie in the sky, they're not just conceptual imagery, they're the actual reality of the world that they live in. And so that is so much of, I think, the optimism and the futurism is manifested because you see all these things that for the world that we all live in, the audience lives in, are associated with dreams and aspirations, and then here they're very real. But I think what was really important was to find the proportions of that, to find what is the balance beyond which you lose the connection. Going again on that logic that, like, basically anything built prior to 1950 in New York is probably the same. That yielded a very nice sort of two-thirds classic looking New York, one-third retrofuturistic New York, that felt like the right proportion. Because if it felt too much retrofuturistic, like 50-50 even, I think, then it starts to lose its identity as New York, which would be a huge mistake, because then it's just some, alien city or something. Something you mentioned about the when the lift doors open and you're in the Baxter apartment, it's not the glass that's curved, actually, because the glass is, when you look at the exterior of the building, it's a monolith of glass. What that is a secondary structure within the structure of the building. So if you go out, when you exit the conversation pit and you're standing at the glass line, you look up, you see the glass goes all the way up. It's a sort of a wooden barrel or nest that we created within that set, most importantly, to feel like the place where a family lived. And a New York penthouse, it's not particularly a cozy thing, a New York penthouse. It's a lot about the view, for sure, but it's about, usually there's a lot of like opulence and wealth associated with what that look is. But more important was that it feel like a warm home where a family lives. And so through that, we came to this idea of, like, how do we create almost like a West Coast mid-century modern home within a New York penthouse? And that's where we arrived at this like idea of this wooden secondary domed structure that's inside of it. where it's wrapped in this lovely, rich, warm colored wood. There's flagstone, natural materials that you walk across as you exit the lift to enter this carpeted, sunken conversation pit, which is again sort of like womb-like and soft. And in the center of it is a fireplace.
Yeah, and that certainly comes across because we also see a lot of domestic scenes. Obviously, we see the kitchen, we see the bathroom where we discover the pregnancy, we see the bedroom, we
Yes.
see Johnny's room. So it very much feels like a family house. But just coming back to that space where you have this sort of Saarinen-esque curves in wood. And then
Yes.
I noticed that you had the fireplace with the central flue, which has the kind of
Yeah.
tulip shapes echoed by
Yeah.
the Saarinen tables around. So there's lots of echoes of shapes that seem to
That's right.
bounce off each other, which is really, really quite beautiful. You've got these mobiles above, these Calder mobiles, which I think
Calder-esque,
is...
yeah. But which also is a lighting. There's a mobile that we integrated lights into.
Before we return to our conversation with Kasra Farahani, a quick reminder that many of the stunning pieces you've heard us talk about, and plenty more besides, are available to buy through the Film and Furniture Marketplace. Take the Saarinen tulip chairs and tables, originally designed in the 1950s by Eero Saarinen as part of his pedestal collection for Knoll. These sculptural forms were created to clear up the slum of legs under dining tables. Their clean lines and space-age elegance feel right at home in the Baxter apartment, and they still look every bit as modern today. We also spotted the Saarinen Wound Chair, a true icon of comfort and form, which wraps you in a hug of soft curves and mid-century style. Then there's the Cobra Table Lamp by Elio Martinelli, a 1960s Italian masterpiece of form and function with a rotating shade inspired by a snake poised to strike. And the Pantella table lamps by Werner Panton that cast a soft, diffused light that feels both futuristic and timeless. Not to mention those Calder-esque mobiles hanging from the ceiling, playful, kinetic and sculptural, which echo beautifully throughout the design language of the film. These and many more original mid-century classics, as seen on screen, are available now for your own home. Browse the collection at filmandfurniture.com, and always the link is in the show description. And then I might be reading too much into this, but I've studied Kubrick too long, so it's become a bit of a lifetime's mission. When it comes, those Calder colours, in that Calder-esque colours in those mobiles, the primary colours of the yellow, the red and the blue, and then you move into Reed Richards' lab, and I'm like, oh my God, this is like a big version of that mobile, and it's all rounded in interesting shapes and curves, and that lab is next level. Talk us through that, because you've got these 3 colour zoned areas.
You know what? I mean, those colors were very much, it's a motif. I would say there was like a literal connection, but it's, they repeat and they're critically important. 2001: A Space Odyssey was absolutely a super important reference for us, especially as it related to the design of the technical spaces like the lab and the workstations inside the spacecraft and things like that. But also just the Eames palette. There's a lot of overlap between the Eames palette, which again is part of that sort of West Coast flavor of mid-century modernism. That's the kind of the lighter version of mid-century modernism than you got, I think, in Europe, where there's a lot of kind of brutalist influence in mid-century, and then the East Coast of the States, where it's, I don't know, somewhere halfway in between. So some of that warmth comes from the Eames influence, some of it's from the Kubrick influence. Definitely in the lab, that was very much inspired by what we saw in 2001. The lab is a space that is meant to be heavily fortified because Reed is in there doing all sorts of like very cutting edge um, experimentation with elements gathered from various space travels and a lot of uncertainty about the sort of work that he's doing in there. And so it's really important that that space feel fortified, which is why we have this sort of parabolic arched ceiling with these kind of absorptive bridges, fluting in it, sort of like sound baffling or something like that. The idea is that should it should feel like if something explodes in there, this room can absorb it and take the impact. Net effect also of that shape, though, is that it ends up almost giving you this, I hope, this feeling of like a cathedral, like a science cathedral in some ways. I think that's helped by the white everywhere, which was important because again, it's a technical space where technical machines are operating and tolerances are very critical, and so it has to be clean all the time, which is why we wanted it to be a kind of this gleaming white, optimistic space. But then again, this white kind of envelope becomes this great canvas for color. The idea is that there's the red circle when you first walk in is the place where all the kind of messy work happens, basically robotics, electronics, chemistry. Uh, if tools are involved, whether it's welding or soldering or something, it happens there. And the central space is the yellow area, and that's a space for thinking and contemplation and discussion. So it's really about these massive chalkboards, two layers of them that come up and down as he dedicates them to different topics. And then finally, there's the blue area, which is essentially like a mission control. There's a large, array of screens on the wall next to it, but also, as you can see, there's any number of Tulip monitors built into it.
I just stop you on the
Yeah,
blue
yeah,
bulbous screens that
yeah,
seem to
yeah,
appear like they're different heights and different sizes, and they appear
yeah,
to sort of grow out of the high gloss plastic blue area. That was
yeah.
amazing. What was it? Where did that come from?
Thanks so much for saying it because it almost killed Jilly and Fergus, her assistant decorator, especially who was handling that, and they did such a beautiful job on it. I mean, it all came out of this idea of this fluted, parabolic curves, conic sections, fluting. You'll see it everywhere, whether it's in the furniture we discussed in the apartment, even the architectural details, like for instance in the conversation pit, the bottom step is a radius cove. That's a detail we pulled from Niemeyer's Communist Party headquarters in Paris. But it's a motif that exists everywhere, where things grow out of other things. Luigi Colani's work was definitely an influence for some of that.
And they were all new materials then, I guess.
They were absolutely, and they were pushing the limits of what could be done with it, and arriving at some extraordinary solutions, I think. But yeah, so that area is about computing. It's the mission control, whether they're monitoring the Excelsior aircraft, spacecraft, or they're receiving transmissions from deep space, or they're analyzing specimens from the surface of a planet. It happens in that area.
And then you managed to sort of change the mood a little when we get into Johnny's room, which is a little bit more playful, a bit more like a kid's room. And we've got these like amazing Florence Knoll blue chairs and this incredible
Hmm.
round bed and some amazing Werner Pantone lights. And then this record player. Is this a
Yes.
real thing?
It's not. It's something we designed and built from scratch, designed to tie into a lot of kind of iconic furniture pieces of the era. But the record player, and there's another one in the living room that comes off the wall. This was a movie and a world where everything was curated. So Julie and her team had to build uh, so much.
In terms of what you build and what you do in CGI, how do you
Mm,
think through how those
yeah.
worlds are going to merge?
Well, you know what? I mean, it was challenging because we needed so much control of what the world looked like. It was not easy to just, rock up and use a location. We did use a couple of small locations in London. There was an alley and a synagogue interior that we used. The Times Square, we built that. And Yancey
Of course you
Street,
did.
yeah, we built that
I love
too.
that. We just built Times Square.
It was quite large. It was two-thirds the size of the actual Times Square. We built up to about 30 feet, and we had three huge marquees for these kind of iconic movie theaters. the Forum, the Archeo Palace, the Embassy. I can't remember the exact number, but I think the Embassy, the number of light bulbs, I had like over 100,000 light bulbs in it. The critical location that we did use was a building designed by Santiago Calatrava in Oviedo, Spain. And that is when you see the interior of the Baxter lobby, or when you see the kind of assembly hall that is the kind of future foundation assembly hall, which is sort of like the UN, that is inside that Calatrava building.
Hmm.
Um, in terms of how we integrate CGI, the VFX team led by Scott, um, they had their hands full with the fact that these characters are constantly CGI. Ben is CGI the entire time. Johnny's CGI most of the time, as he's flaming on, and Reed and Sue are about half the time doing some sort of visual augmentation. Most of this movie had to be touched by visual effects in some way. The kind of area in which the actor spent their time and the camera spent most of its time was physically there. Reed's lab was 100% in camera. There was no set extension in Reed's lab at all. So the idea is to build everything. Now, when you get to an environment like the world ship, the interior of Galactus's world ship, an exterior landscape scale inside. It's almost like if you had the Yosemite Valley built out of machinery on the inside of a spacecraft. So the scale exceeds what anything that one can build, and yet there's enough time being spent there that we needed to offer some relief from visual effect. So we built a stage full, basically, of massive coiling pipes and things. Basically, what you see them walking on was practical, was real. So in terms of how the light is bouncing up onto them, in terms of interactive light embedded into that, in terms of their performance and the sort of trepidation they demonstrate as they're moving through this sort of thing that is definitely not designed for humans to traverse, all that was real and practical.
And I think that is, it comes across very much in the movie. And I think that's why people are saying that it stands out, amongst other movies of its type, because the performances feel grounded. And I'm sure that's because a lot of the world is real. So you feel the emotion, you feel the connection. I just wanted to ask you about, retrofuturism must have been a difficult, from a design point of view, amazing references, of course. But when it comes to designing the way people thought about the future back
Yes,
then, but
sure.
we're in the present now, must have been a bit of kind of, I noticed it in things
Yeah.
like the car, the fantastic car, the fact it flew and it did amazing
Mm,
things, obviously, and
mm,
it does all these
mm.
incredible things, but you shut the door and it's just slightly clunky. And that's what I think made it feel grounded in the 60s, is this, the sort of
Mhm.
the noise of things, the shape of things, the feel of things.
I mean, I think it's also scale, how big everything was then. I mean, Fantastic Car is massive. I think it was like it rivals the largest production Cadillac ever made. It's about as long as the longest Cadillac ever made. Um, and you wouldn't necessarily know it because it's sleek and svelte, but yeah, it's a massive thing. Again, that balance between the kind of cruder version of retrofuturism that we saw in the earlier decades of the 20th century, and then that more refined futurism that we get in the late 60s from architects. But like there was a comic strip, for lack of a better term, published in the Chicago Tribune from the late 50s into the early 60s by an artist called Arthur Raidbow. And it was called Closer Than We Think. And it was, just a comic strip, but it was about fallout technology. So it would start with a piece of technology that scientists had discovered and then extrapolate from that fantastical implementations of it, inevitably having to do with space and, farms on the moon, or,
Mm.
some of this jet age stuff. And it's very kind of naive and funny and but also really cool. And so it was trying to bring some of that wonder uh, into the world and balance it with super sophisticated and careful form language.
Yeah, and I think it is that sense of wonder and that sort of optimism that we talked about earlier, that which is what design was about then, about brave new worlds, really.
Yeah.
And I think that's why the story, the plot, feels so right to me to be set in that period, because it is about family togetherness and thinking forward. Did you read the original comics?
You know what? I was not a big comic person, to be honest with you. No. So, but we certainly referenced them in the course of the design of the film. You always try to find what the sacred cows are, basically. What are the things that are super important to capturing what is important and special about the world of these characters, and what are the things that are more elastic, that you can kind of try to reinvent. And it was risky. We reinvented both the Fantastic Car and the Baxter Building, and those are kind of seminal pieces of the comic. Um, I always think that's, in my opinion, that's how you serve the audience best, is that you find a way to honor the spirit of the thing that they love, that brought them to it, and yet give them something new. Because if you're not giving them something new, then what are you doing? They can, if they want the version they've seen, they can find that already. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then throw in a female Silver Surfer while you're at it.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
Have you always thought, I mean, it's kind of interesting to me that you studied theme, entertainment design, you were thinking theme
Mm,
parks. So,
mm,
not every brilliant designer can think on such a big scale. But
mm,
as a kid, when you were young, were you always sort of like
mm.
thinking about other worlds? Did you draw? Did you have an imagination that kind of went wild?
Yeah, I mean, I always drew. My father was a furniture designer and an interior architect, so we were always around it. But in terms of the scale of it, I completely agree with you that it is a sort of crazy scale, especially the Marvel films.
Mm.
And I've seen really brilliant artists and designers get on a project of this scale. People who've done great work previously and stumble once they get on to this, because it's not the creativity necessarily. It's the logistics and the number of plates that you can spin at the same time, and how many simultaneous development processes you can feed, because you have a huge team helping you. It's definitely not anywhere near a one-man operation, but you still have to feed those teams with direction and information and guidance and little thumbnails and things like that. And I would credit my years of art directing on large movies. I don't know that there's another way to be able to handle a project of this scale other than to have been exposed to it in pieces. By when you're art directing, you get a set or two or three, uh, and then if you supervise, which I did once at least, you're in charge of the whole thing. But I art directed a long time, and there were many projects where because I had a knack for certain things, I ended up getting buried in sets, and I'm grateful for that experience, because it's what takes the fear away. I mean, I don't want to overstate it. There's still fear. It's a huge sum of money and a huge amount of responsibility and not a lot of time. Um, but I think, yeah, that exposure is what I think gave me an ability to wrap my head around it.
And probably brave as well, because, we all have fear, right? You have
Sure.
fear on another scale, which is creating an entire Marvel universe. But still, you're brave enough to break through the fear and still be
Well,
creative at the
yeah.
same time. I mean, that is something.
Yeah, and that again is down to the team. It's down to the brilliance and the quality and the talent of the people you choose to surround yourself with. I think it's true for any job of management of any kind, whether you're a production designer or a decorator or any other department head. I think your number one job and the number one determining factor of your success is how well you hire.
Yeah. So
You
you got to
know?
be big thinker and good with people. earn one job on the planet. That has to bring all of that together. That's production designer. So on that note,
Yeah.
thank you so much for sharing all those incredible insights, and congratulations to you and your team on all the incredible work on Fantastic Four First Steps. A pleasure to talk with you.
Likewise, Paula. Thank you so much. I'm such a huge fan of the Instagram feed, the podcast, all of it. You guys showcase really beautiful stuff that sometimes you don't get to actually see in the detail you'd like to. So thank you for that.
Ah, wonderful. Great to hear. Thank you, Kasra. Take care.
Take care.
I hope you enjoyed that insightful chat. You can take a look at our in-depth feature and film set images at filmandfurniture.com, where you'll find many fascinating articles on interiors, furniture, decor and lighting in film, as well as where to find these items for your own home in our marketplace. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you next time.